World of Warcraft Beyond the Dark Portal by Aaron Rosenberg and Christy Golden. Chapter 9. Faster, damn it! Faster! Daneth lashed at the reins against his steed's neck. His horse whickered in protest. Its mouth flicked with foam, but obeyed. Daneth didn't hear the sound of the horse's increasingly rapid hoofbeats on the hard-packed earth. He heard only the sounds of primitive weapons striking home, the grunts of howls and savagery, the cries of his men as they fell, taken by surprise at that strange darkness that abruptly dropped to reveal the orcs waiting for them. They'd been led right into a trap. There was no time to strategize, no time to do anything but fight, and too many were so taken aback they didn't even have time to swing before the green tide had washed over them. Daneth closed his eyes, but he still saw them fall. Horses and men both going down beneath the onslaught that was as efficient as it was brutal and barbaric. He had been looking right at Farrell, about to cry out a warning when a huge orc had literally barreled into the boy's horse and unseated him. The boy went down at once. Daneth didn't see Farrell die, but he thought he heard his screams for the rest of his life. Farrell, all afire with a desire for battle and glory, wanted to go kill his first orc. He hadn't even had a chance to strike a blow. Daneth had realized at once, sickened, that they would fail. His men had seen it too, and they'd known what must be done. "Commander, go to the fortress!" Van had urged him, even as he struggled with a much larger opponent wielding a club. "Tell them, we'll cover you!" Other soldiers had added their voices to the ensemble agrees. Daneth hesitated, feeling ripped in two. Stay here and fight with his men, or flee to perhaps save them. "Go!" Van cried, turning his head to shout at his commander. Their eyes met. "For the sons of The orc had struck in that second of inattention. His club descended with deadly force. Daneth had wheeled his horse around before Van fell, and had spurred it on, screaming insanely at the beast, galloping away from the carnage toward the fortress, away from Farrell and Van and all the others he had led here to their deaths. Daneth bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. They had been right, of course. Someone had to warn Netherguard, and he had to authorize a familial connections to make himself heard. His experience and leadership skills, too, could not afford to be lost. But by the light, he'd never done anything harder in his life than leave his men behind. He cursed softly, shook his head to clear it, and yelled at the horse again. The trail twisted and turned in the life-draining land. Red dust rose beneath his horse's hooves. Daneth clung like a blur and glanced up at one point to see the vast stone walls of Netherguard Keep. Already he could see guards atop its parapets, pointing down at him, and no doubt alerting others to his approach. "Open the gates!" he shouted as loud as he could, holding his shield high before him so they could see his alliance symbol emblazoned there. "Open the gates!" The heavy timber and iron gates slowly parted, and he galloped on through without slowing. Once inside, Daneth slipped from his saddle and turned to the nearest soldier. "Who is in charge here?" he demanded, realizing he was grasping for breath. "Sir, state your name and business, please," the soldier replied. "I do not have time for this," Daneth growled, grabbing the soldier by his breastplate collar and drawing him close. "Who is in charge here?" "I am," a voice said from behind him. Daneth released the soldier and spun around to find himself facing a tall, broad-shouldered man in violet robes that marked him as one of Dalaran wizards. The man had long white hair and a matching beard, but behind the lines in his face, his eyes were young and alert. "Daneth Trobane, isn't it?" the mage asked. "I thought you were with Terralion." Daneth nodded, both in confirmation of the man's statement and the recognition of Khadgar's identity, and sucked in the air to speak. "Close your gate and arm your men. The horde is here." Khadgar's eyes widened, but he did not argue. He signaled with his hand, and the men rushed to obey his silent commands. The gate was closed as someone came to take Daneth's poor, overworked mount, and another approached with a water skin. "What's happened?" "Terralion sent me with half the men we had at Stormwind." Daneth gulped down water, warm but wet, and nodded curiously, thanks to the man who brought it to him. "We left as soon as received your message. He followed with the rest." He shook his head, wiping his mouth. "We were too late. The orcs have already rebuilt the portal, and they're waiting for us there. My boys never stood a chance. Kagar nodded, his eyes somber. I am sorry for their loss, but your warning gives us time to prepare. If the Horde plans to invade Azeroth again, they will have to get past us first, and Nethergard was built for this. They will not find this keep so easily taken. How will you defend it? Daneth asked, sufficiently recovered from his ride to glance around. It doesn't look like you have that many soldiers, and I don't see any ballistae or other siege engines along the walls. We do not have many soldiers, true, Kagar agreed. But that does not mean we are without defenses or weapons. You'll see. I suppose I will. Daneth bared his teeth in a smile. And when they come, I will be waiting. The orcs arrived an hour later. They swept up the path, filling the trail like water rolling down a narrow chute, elbowing each other aside in their haste to reach the keep's sturdy outer walls. Daneth and Kagar stood upon one of the taller parapets, watching the scene below. Damn, the hundreds of them, Daneth whispered, watching the horde literally fill the plain before the keep and advance in a great sheet of flesh and weaponry. In the thick of the battle, he had not been able to notice the sheer number. Indeed, Kagar said. The young old mage did not seem concerned. Not as many as during the Second War, though either they lost much of their strength in those battles, or they are withholding part of their full force right now. He shrugged. Not that it matters. We will deal with whatever they throw at us. You inquired about the keep's defenses. Watch. He pointed, and Daneth made out splashes of color all along the walls. Men and women stood there, clad in violet robes much like Kagar's own. The Archmage nodded then, and all the Magi raised their hands as one. Daneth felt the hair stand on end and heard a faint hum. The lightning arced down, destroying the first wave of orcs and scattering many of those behind them. Impressive, Daneth acknowledged, his ears ringing from the accompanying thunderclap. But how many times can they do that? Kagar smiled. I suspect we're about to find out. Taralian crouched low over his horse, urging it on to greater speed, even though he knew that waiting for reinforcements in the form of Alira's rangers had been wise. Something inside him insisted that they might be too late. That something was already happening at Nethergard. He wasn't sure if it was the soldier's instinct or his own insecurities, but the paladin, normally gentle with the beast, kicked his horse again and again. Beside him rode his men, Alira and her rangers. Alira threw him a cautious look, not noting his spurring of the mount, but stayed silent. He glanced over at her, wanting to explain somehow, but all that came out was, "Something's happening already." She opened her mouth for a quip, but closed it when she saw the look on his face. Instead, she simply nodded and bent over to whisper to her horse's ear. He realized she believed him, and for a moment, the worry and fear abated before a quick warmth. The ride seemed to take forever, though the meadow and rolling hills of Goldshire and little town of Darkshire, through the grey land that was abruptly named Deadwind Pass, near where Medivh had lived in Karazhan, into the muddy, malarious swamp of sorrows. But now the land was changing, and Taralian felt a lurch inside him as he noticed it. The foliage, though decomposing and unpleasant smelling, was at least a sign of life. The ground beneath him was starting to turn red and dry, almost desert-like. Alira frowned. "Feels dead," she said, shouting to be heard over the thunder of the horse's hooves. Taralian nodded, unable to spare breath. They passed on through the bare landscape, cresting a small hill. There, rising like a white peak above the blood-red surroundings, was the keep. He drew his horse to a halt, straining to see what it was that nagged his mind, and murmured, "Something's wrong." Alira shielded her eyes from the glare of the sun. She could see better than he, and when she gasped, Taralian knew he had been right. "It's under attack!" she cried. "The Horde! Taralian! It's like seeing the force from the Second War all over again. There must be hundreds of them." And the tone in her voice was half horror, half glee, and the cold, hot smile of hate and rage that twisted her face again. He recalled their conversation upon her arrival in Stormwind, and certainly looked like Alira was going to get the chance to exterminate a lot of vermin. He hated to see her so hungry for death, and feared that hunger might make her reckless. "We're almost upon them," he said to her and to his commanders who had drawn up beside him. "We'll strike from behind, pitting the orcs between Nethergard and us. Once we've defeated them, we'll enter the citadel and fortify its defenses in case they attack again. Let's go!" They raced towards the last rise. Right before they crested it, Trollian again called a halt. Just beyond them, the trail climbed a final time, past boulders and up a short incline, and then the plateau opened before them. From here they could see it all. Orcs, hundreds of them, were battering the Nethergard walls, though the keep thus far seemed to be weathering the attack with ease. Here and there were orc bodies. Trollian saw at least one with an arrow through its neck. Several others were badly charred, but some corpses seemed unharmed. He glanced up, spying the violet-robed figures on the fortress parapets, and despite the direness of the situation, he smiled slightly as he understood. "We need to strike before they realize we are here. Rally the men and charge upon my command." His commanders, including Illyria, nodded and moved off to their own units, passing orders quietly. Weapons were drawn, straps were tightened, shields and visors were lowered, and the army advanced. Trollian and the others crept forward, covering the last distance before the plateau. The horses' feet muffed by the dust. Thank the light. The orcs were too busy shouting and cursing and grunting to hear their approach. It was time. They'd gone as far as stealth would take them. Trollian took a deep breath and raised his hammer high over his head. "Sons of Lothar!" he shouted, the power of the holy light manifesting his voice so it carried to everyone under his command. "For the Alliance! For the light!" His soldiers roared behind him. Several hundred throats uttered their own battle cries. Trollian swung the hammer down and forward, and the charge began. Some of the rearmost orcs heard his shout and turned only to be trampled by the surging horses. Others were taken unawares, slain before they could even see the threat racing up from behind. From the fortress, men cheered as Trollian and his forces swept forward, lying about them with hammers and axes and swords. Illyria and her rangers fired arrow after arrow, drawing and knocking with inhuman speed to their aim unerring, their horses never breaking stride. In a surprising short time, Trollian had won through the Nethergate's enormous front gates, which swung open as he approached. Trollian hesitated, looking back over the battle. His eyes met Illyria's. He gestured toward the gate. She frowned slightly. She was as reluctant as he to leave the thick of battle, but they were the leaders of their units, and she knew, as he did, they should speak with the commander of the keep as soon as they could. When she nodded, Trollian spurred his steed through the narrow gap, crushing an orc that tried to follow. Illyria was beside him, close enough that her leg brushed against his, and then the gate shut again behind them. "Ah, good. Illyria, you've brought Trollian to us just in time." Trollian turned toward the speaker and smiled as he recognized Khadgar. Roughly, they embraced. Trollian had missed the friend he had grown to so like and admire as they worked together through the Second War. He wished they were not reunited under these circumstances. Illyria gave the mage a curt nod. "I came as fast as I could," Trollian said. He spied another man he recognized, and he smiled in relief. "Daneth!" He greeted his second in command. "I'm glad to see you're safe." He glanced around. "But where are your men?" "Dead," Daneth replied curtly. "By the lights, all of them," Trollian whispered. Daneth had taken fully half of the warriors of Stormwind. Daneth gritted his teeth at the words. "The orcs had a nice little trap ready for us when we could reach the valley. They slaughtered my boys before they could react." Daneth's voice cracked ever so slightly. "My boys," he called them. Trollian realized Daneth blamed himself for the deaths. "They sacrificed themselves that I might reach here and warn Khadgar of the Horde's approach." "They did the right thing, and so did you," Trollian assured his friend and subordinate. "It is an awful thing to lose the men under your command, but alerting Nethergate was the first priority." He frowned. "Khadgar, we need to figure out why they're attacking now." "It's obvious. They need to get past us to reach the rest of Azeroth," Khadgar replied, but Trollian shook his head. "No, that doesn't make sense. Think about it. They lack the numbers to take this keep, and they must know it. I'm willing to bet it's not the entire Horde. It can't be. So where are the rest? Why attack with only a partial army? Kagar's white brows drew together over his youth eyes. You raise an excellent point. One way to find out, Dennis said briskly. Bring me an orc, and believe me, I'll get out of him what we want to know. The way he said it and the set of his jaw made Terralion flinch. He saw in Dana's face an echo of Alira's single-minded hatred for the orcs. For all of their brutality, for all the pain and damage and hurt to this world they have caused, he could not help but pity whatever captive Daneth Trollbane took it upon himself to question. He only hoped the orc would speak quickly, for its sake and their own. They're waiting for his approval. He nodded reluctantly and turned to Illyria, but before he could speak, she had hurried up one of the towers, anxious to be doing something, anything. She called down the order, waiting for the reply, then grinned fiercely. It will not take long, she said. Terralion expected her to climb back down. Instead, she stayed where she was, knocking an arrow to her long, elegant bow, taking aim, and joining in the battle from the vantage point. The elf was right. Not 3 minutes later, a cry went up inside. We've got one! The massive gates were again open. A pair of Terralion's men rode through, half-drag an unconscious orc between them. They dumped the body on the ground at the general's feet. Blood covered its bare green head, and its eyes were closed. It did not stir as it hit the ground. One orc still alive, sir, one of the two men reported. He took a good hit to his head, but he's alive. For a while, at least. Terralion nodded, dismissing them. Both men saluted before wheeling their horses about and charging back out the gate, diving once more into the fray. Let's see what we have here, Daneth murmured. He bound the orc's hands and feet with heavy rope, then splashed water on the monster's face. It woke with a start, grimacing, and then frowned and started to growl as it noticed the restraints. Why are you attacking us now? Daneth demanded, leaning over the orc. Why hit Netherguard when you aren't at full strength? I show you strength! The orc warrior roared, struggling against his bonds, but they held fast. I don't think you quite understand, Daneth said slowly, drawing his dagger and idly waving it mere inches from the orc's face. I asked you a question. You best answer it. Why attack Netherguard now? Why not wait until the entire horde is here? Blood and spittle spattered Daneth's face. He jerked back, surprising, then slowly wiped the spit off. I'm tired of playing with you, he growled, and leaned forward with the dagger. Wait, Terralion ordered. He deeply disapproved of torture, and he was beginning to think that even if he permitted Daneth to continue, the orc would say nothing of use. Orcs had a high tolerance for pain, and chances were he'd pass out or die before speaking. There might be another way to find out. Daneth stayed his hands. He felt Illyria's eyes on him, angry, wanting to see the creature hurt. But that would solve nothing. Terralion closed his eyes and slowed his breathing, reaching for the quiet. Still pooled deep inside him. The center where no matter what was raging in his head or heart, he was at peace. From that place, a calmness, he asked for aid, for the light. He felt a tingling along his skin as the light responded, granting him its power and its unspeakable grace. He heard gasps from his friends, and a frightened cry from the prisoner, and inhaled deeply, opened his eyes to see the familiar shimmering along his hands, his arms. Daneth and Kagar stared at him, their eyes wide in shock, and as for the orc, it was a hurled ball of green at its feet, whimpering incoherently. When he spoke, Terralion's voice was completely calm and controlled. There was no place here for hate or the heat of anger, not when one stood fully in the light. Now, by the holy light, you will answer our questions and do so truthfully, Terralion intoned, reaching out and resting his palm against the orc's forehead. There was a sudden blinding flash of light. He felt a spark leap from flesh to flesh. The orc shrieked, and when Terralion moved his hand, there was a dark handprint there, as if it had been burned in. The orc shivered and groveled, weeping. Terralion hoped he had not scared it senseless. Why attack now? He asked yet again. To distract you, he sobbed, from the thefts. It had been stubbornly silent before. Now it apparently couldn't speak fast enough. Ner'zhul needs things. Artifacts. He ordered us attack the keep. Alliance stay busy here and not see anything else. Kagar was stroking his full beard. He'd recovered faster than Danath, who was still staring at the young paladin. Trorian risked a glance at Illyria to find her too, looking at him with an exasperation of stunned disbelief. When their eyes met, she colored slightly and looked away. A simple plan, but simple plans are often the best, Kagar offered. What artifacts, though, and why would we need such things from our world and not from his own? The orc shook his head, trembling. He doesn't know! Trembling. He doesn't know, Thralian said. He'd tell us if he knew. With the light upon him so, the orc could not lie. The gates creaked open just enough for two elves to squeeze through before it shut again. Thralian glanced up as they approached him, his eyes narrowing as he realized they both looked exhausted. What news? Stormwind, sir, one of the elves replied. Someone broke into the royal library. The guards found the bodies of two men stationed outside the door and one inside. Looks like one died by an orc axe, sir. Orcs? In the royal library? Thralian whirled to stare at Kagar, then at the orc who cringed away. Artifacts, he murmured, putting the pieces together. The perfect distraction, Kagar was forced to admit. Damn it! I'd say the simple plan worked very well indeed. We were busy here fighting the orcs, and someone made off with... He turned to the elves. What exactly did someone make off with, if anything? Now the elven scouts looked less than happy. Unfortunately, you're right, Lord Wizard. One thing was indeed missing. And that was, Thralian prompted. The elf cleared his throat. The Book of Medivh. The light, Thralian whispered, feeling a knot form in the pit of his stomach. The Book of Medivh? The spellbook of the greatest mage in all the world. The man who had helped the orcs create the original portal. The book containing all the brilliant wizard's many secrets in the hands of the orcs. Beside him, Kagar seemed stricken as well. Thralian, I need that book to close the portal. What? Thralian cried. Medivh and Gul'dan created the thing. That spellbook could tell me how to close it. Not only that, if the orcs have it, they can use it against us in any number of ways. This is bad. Very, very bad. Thralian shook his head, reaching for the calm place inside himself. I understand, but we can't worry about it right now. We got orcs outside, and distraction or not, there's still a great danger. Our job is to protect the keep and prevent them from spreading past it. Once that is done, then we'll go from there. He eyed his friends, who nodded slowly. He glanced up at Illyria, thinking he saw a hint of approval glimmer in her green eyes, before she again lifted her bow to resume firing. You're right, General, Kagar said, inclining his head. We have a keep to defend. We can't solve a puzzle if we're not alive to do so. Thralian gave a weary, worried grin, climbed back atop his mount, and rode again into the maelstrom that was the battle. Chapter 10. We'll divide into two groups, Gorfin instructed Fenris, Hagar, and his Death Knights. Around them was the bustle of a camp being broken as swiftly as possible. He glanced up as the sound stilled abruptly. Deathwing had rejoined them, looking as perfectly human as he had before, and he caught Gorfin's eyes. What? Did you think I would not return? No. Of course I did. Something about how he said it obviously displeased the great dragon, whose black brows drew together. Gorfin realized the words could be interrupted as arrogance, and hastened to add, I completely trust your word, Lord. The dragon looked mollified. Gorfin continued, We need to travel to Alterac, and from there to Daluran. May we ask you for the aid of your children in this? You may, I will summon them now. Deathwing tilted back his head, his mouth open far wider than any true human could, and uttered a strange rippling cry that teased at the ears, creating phantoms of other sounds and generating a cool breeze that reeked of old death. Some of the orcs shrank back, and even Gorfin was hard put to keep his face calm as the earth itself shook and rumbled beneath his feet, as if replying directly to the Black Lord. Finally, Deathwing closed his mouth, and his face assumed its normal proportions. There we are, he said, grinning in obvious delight at the discomfort of both Orc and Death Knights. They will come. Thank you. Gorfing bowed. He turned toward the two Orc chieftains. He was not looking forward to what he had to ask of them, and feared they might balk. But it had to be done. Your task will be challenging, but vital. I must ask you to go to the tomb of Sargeras. Tagar growled uneasily, and even the sturdier Fenris looked upset. You send us to our deaths, then, Fenris snapped. Not at all. There is an artifact there that Nazuo requires. I will send along Ragnarok to aid you and explain what. Gul'dan! The powerful Gul'dan died there, Fenris interrupted. We have heard the stories of how Gul'dan raised it from the ocean bed, only to be attacked by the monstrous things guarding that horrible place. We have heard how only a few escaped, and that most died there, screaming in pain. Evil lies in that darkness, Gorfiend. The Death Knight spared only a moment to be amused at the comment. He well knew that the humans on this world thought the orcs themselves monstrous evil things. Do you think I would send you and one of my own knights if I believed you would not be successful? They had no answer for that and exchanged uneasy glances. Gorfing graced them with his Death Rictus smile. That's better. As I was saying, you must retrieve a certain artifact. Ragnarok will explain everything. Once you've found it, return to the Dark Portal as soon as possible, and we will meet you there. The Warsong clan won't be able to keep the Alliance distracted and busy forever. Both chieftains nodded, looking more confident. Gorfin regarded them for a moment. Tagar was a powerful fighter, but he had no subtlety and little intelligence. Fenris, however, was clever and subtle enough for both of them, and his bearing told Gorfin that he would keep the young bone-chewer chieftain in line. Satisfied, Gorfin turned to the Dragon Lord. Great Deathwing, can you bear them to the tomb? The Dragon Man nodded. We know of this island of which you speak, he said. And here are my children. Enough to accommodate both groups, I think. Even as the words left Deathwing's lips, Gorfiend heard a sharp flurry of noise, as if a heavy rain were stalking the pellets, slashing through the air and into the rock and earth all around. Looking up, Gorfiend did see dark streaks against the stars, but they were most certainly not raindrops. Beneath his feet, he felt the earth rumble again. Suddenly, he saw specks of bright orange as the streaks increased in size, swelling and becoming diamond-shaped. His eyes widened as he realized the orange glow he had seen was fiery magma in the beast's huge jaw, and the increasingly loud noise was the beating of gigantic wings. Gorfin watched, awestruck, as the dragon swooped down. The very earth shook as the mighty creatures landed, liquid fire dripping from their mouths to steam, glowing and sullen on the earth. They were beautiful in their deadliness. Their scales gleamed in the starlight, a glossy black light, a midnight pool, and their claws seemed like polished iron as they perched on the earth, or on giant boulders, seeming to Gorfin's eyes a living lethal extension of the earth upon which they stood. When they had all come to ground. The dragons folded their great leathery wings and watched the orcs closely, their ebony eyes staring, their heads swiveling, and tails flicking silently. Gorfin was reminded of a cat analyzing its prey before casually dispatching it and shivered slightly. "Here are my children," Deathwing announced, the pride evident in his voice. "The finest of all the creatures of Azeroth." He pointed to a particularly large dragon nearby, two great horns jutting up from his brow. "Sibelian," Deathwing announced, and the dragon lowered his head as his name was announced. "Is my lieutenant in all things. He and a few companions will bear your orcs to the island you spoke of. And as for your jaunt to Alterac, I'll take you there myself." "I am honored," Gorfing started to say, but Deathwing silenced him with an impatient wave of his hand. His eyes glittered like banked coils as he continued. "Don't get too full of yourself, Death Knight. I do not do it to show you respect, but to ensure success. My plans will come to naught if you fail. I suggest you do not if you wish to remain alive. Well, at least as alive as you are now." Deathwing smirked slightly, then it began to laugh, the sound rising from an ordinary human laugh to mutate into something much darker and much more frightening. He threw his head back and lifted his arms, the gesture stirring up the wind that buffeted Gorfin and the others against the rocks behind them. What was he doing now? Gorfin wondered for a frantic moment, if this whole thing had been some sort of dreadful joke, and that at last Deathwing had tired of the game. The flames of their dying campfires flickered and swayed in the sudden gust, casting grotesque dancing shadows. Behind the manacled laughing man, Deathwing's own shadow swelled and grew, twisting as if it were a living thing itself, changing form as it rose behind him. Vast wings spread out across the mountain range, engulfing all his dragons and much of the surrounding land as well. For a third time that night, the earth trembled, and this time many of the orcs fell hard to the ground. Sudden fissures split open, scalding steam rippling the space above them, red-orange magma in the depths echoing the liquid flame that dripped from the dragon's mouth. Even as his shadow rose and took on more detail, Deathwing's human body contorted. Its edges grew indistinct, as if they were being absorbed into the shadows behind him. Only his eyes remained clear, glowing longer and more slanted, taking on reddish cast from the reflected glow of the flames, but then outshined those thin fires. Still, the shadow grew, as did the shifting, blurring body that cast it. It seemed to have its own substance now, and was somehow pushing away from the rocks. The body elongated, increased in bulk, changing rapidly to match its shadow. A black dragon, yes, but more. The black dragon, the mightiest, most powerful, most dangerous of them all, the father of the flight. Gorfin thought he would be the most perfect specimen of his kind, but as the shape before him grew more distinct, the Death Knight realized that Deathwing lacked the dark beauty of his children. Giant plates made of gleaming metal ran along the dragon's spine from the tail to the back of his long, narrow head. Beneath them, Gorfin caught glimpses of red and gold and white in radiating lines, as if molten fire was somehow breaking through. As if the metallic plates fastened to Deathwing's spine were physically holding him together. The effect was disjointing, disharmonious, and suddenly Gorfin realized why Deathwing was so meticulous about his appearance in human form. His dragon form was flawed. Red eyes blazed now from the reptilian face. Deathwing spread his wings wide, the great leathery surfaces as dark as the starless sky, and wrinkled as an old crone. Power pulsated from the dragon in waves, like heat from the raging fire. "Come, Death Knight, if you dare," Deathwing commanded, his voice now a deep rumble. He lowered his head almost to the ground, and Gorfin actually found himself frozen in place for a moment before he forced his body to obey. Trembling, he clambered up onto the dragon where his neck met his heavy, armored shoulders. Fortunately, the unnatural metal plates provided easy handholds. The others emulated him, and soon all of Gorfin's band were astride the dragons. With no warning, Deathwing launched himself to the air with a powerful kick and a downward sweep of his wings, lifting them up into the sky by sheer muscle alone. Gorfing clung tight as the ground fell away, and then Deathwing's wings beat down and back, and again they were soaring, the air supporting them as if the massive dragon were as light as a stray leaf. Sibelian and his chosen followers split off, racing forward and disappearing to the right, while Deathwing banked to the right. That wing dripping so low, Gorfing thought it might scrape the ground, and headed for Alterac. Aidan Pernold, king of Alterac and prisoner in his own palace, awoke with a start. He had been dreaming and still remembered vaguely flashes of something large and dark and reptilian looming above him and laughing. Perhaps he thought bitterly it was a metaphor for his fate. He rubbed his face, chasing away the nightmare, but sleep would not return. Murmuring, Paranoid rose from his bed. Perhaps some wine would help. He poured himself a glass of dark red liquid, red as blood, he mused, and sipped it slowly, thinking about the choices that had led him here. It had seemed so easy at the time, so wise, so right. The orcs were going to destroy everything in their path, so he negotiated with them to save his people. He frowned into his glass as he remembered his conversation with Orgrim Doomhammer. It was going to work just fine. Except somehow it hadn't. His so-called treachery had been discovered, and the orcs had failed due to one thing they apparently excelled at: destroying things. Stupid great green oafs. The doors to his bedchamber suddenly burst open. Paranoid started at the noise, spilling the wine all over his sleeping cloths. As several large figures charged in, for an instant he simply gaped, caught up in the sensation that he was still in a ravine as great green oafs he'd just been brooding about charged into his private chambers. Things got even more surreal as the orcs— what were orcs doing in his palace? Seized him and shoved him to the door. Recovering his wits slightly, Paranoid tried to twist away. Without breaking stride, one of them hoisted the king over his shoulder like a sack of grain, and they continued. They stalked through the palace, past the bodies of Paranoid's guards, and out the front doors. Then the orc set Paranoid on his feet again. "No, please, His cries died in his throat. A vast creature, large as the palace itself, loomed above him, a mass of black scales and gleaming plates and leathery wings, the long head, easily as big as he was, swiveled to study him, the red eyes glowing. No. The dry voice— King Paranoid. The dry voice did not seem to emanate from the dragon's long, fanged-filled mouth. And with a start, Paranoid realized the creature was not alone. Someone sat astride its neck and against its shoulders, or perhaps something. Paranoid corrected himself, noting the rider's glowing eyes, hooded cloak, and strange wrapped limbs. Hadn't he heard of such creatures during the Second War as agents of the Horde? King Paranoid, the rider said again. We have come to speak with you. Yes, Paranoid replied, his voice a little more than a squeak. With me, really? During the war, you formed a treaty with the Hordes. Yes, Paranoid made the— Yes, he said quickly. Yes, I did, with Doomhammer himself. I was an ally. I'm on your side. Where is the Book of Medivh? The strange rider demanded. Give it to me. What? The incongruity of the question momentarily banished Paranoid's fear. The book! Why? I have no time for debate. The rider snapped. He murmured something else, gesturing with one hand, and suddenly Paranoid was racked with pain, his entire body spasming. That is but a taste of what I can do to you, the stranger informed him, the words reaching Paranoid as if from a great distance, as the pain washed across him. Hand over the spell book now! Paranoid tried to nod but could not, and fell to his hands and knees instead. Then the pain was gone. He slowly stood, his limbs still trembling, and eyed the two powerful creatures before him, the dragon's burning gaze searing deep into his soul. Somehow that stare seemed less troubling than it had before. The pain had helped clear Paranold's head and focus his mind. This could be an opportunity if he could just keep his wits about him. I have the book, he admitted. Or rather, I had it. Stolen from Stormwind, and I know where it is. He brushed absently at the wine stain on his sleeping clothes. I thought I might need it as a bargaining chip. The Alliance had claimed my throne and my kingdom because I helped you and your kind in the last war. He studied the rider. A Death Knight, he thought, suddenly remembering the term. Yes, clearly he was a Death Knight, which meant he held some importance in the Horde. Paranold considered. I will give you the book. For a favor. The rider did not speak, but something in his bearing indicated he was still listening. The Alliance have stationed troops here in my kingdom to watch me and control me. Destroy them, and the book is yours. For a second, the rider did not move, then nodded.
Very well, he replied. It shall be done. We will return afterwards, and you will tell us where to find the book.
The Death Knight whispered something to the black dragon, and it leaped skyward, his wings carrying him aloft. A rustling all around startled Paranold, followed by the sight of several more dark shapes taking flight. Paranold stared as the black dragons flew from sight, and then he started to laugh. Could it be that simple? Trade an old spellbook, one he could not use for himself, for his freedom and his kingdom's independence? He continued to laugh, aware of the manic quantity the petals held. What's going on? Came a voice. Paranold started and realized it was his eldest son. That was a dragon! And I think a Death Knight? Aeladin continued in a shocked tone. What did you say to them? How did you convince them to leave? Paranold laughed on, unable to stop himself. Damn it, father! Aeladin burst out, punching his father in the jaw hard enough to send the older man sprawling. 2 years I've spent trying to overcome the stigma you've cast on our family name. 2 years! Aeladin glared down at his father, tears streaking his face. You stupid, selfish bastard! You've ruined everything! Paranold shook his head and rose to his feet, but froze mid-motion as he heard a new sound over his son's recognition. What was that? It sounded like... Yes, like a ballista releasing its payload. The rush through the air and the sudden release of the cargo, then a dull whip of the impact. He heard it again, and again, and realized the sounds were coming from over the rise on the far side of the city, near the barracks the Alliance forces had commandeered. He knew then what the sound must mean, and began laughing again. The dragons had begun their attack. Aeladin stared at him, then towards the sound, then back at him again. Comprehension and horror slowly washed across his face. What have you done to us, father? He demanded. What have you done? But Paranold could not control himself enough to answer. Instead, he slumped to the ground and sat there in a heap, shaking with mixed contorts and sobs as he listened to the sound of death and destruction. He had never heard anything so lovely in all his life.
Over there,
Sabian circled, and then settled gracefully on the ground. Roach! Tagar had asked when Ragnarok had explained the plan, clinging to the great black dragon's neck as they flew through the night. I thought the dragons were flying us to this island. But the Death Knight had shaken his cowed head.
It is too far for them to fly directly,
he had explained.
They will take us to Menethil Harbor, and we will obtain boats there to complete the journey.
Fenris had frowned.
Menethil, is that the name of the lineage of kings of this world?
He had said quietly.
Yes, it is the Alliance outpost,
Ragnarok had admitted.
But it's the closest port to the island.
Fenris disliked the idea, but he supposed it could not be helped. The dragons had set them down on a stretch of hilly land close to the harbor, separated by a small body of water. Fenris slipped off the dragon and gazed over the dark inlet's activity. It looked quiet, but there were lights here and there. The harbor likely would be guarded. He motioned to his warriors, pointed at the harbor, and lifted his finger to his lips. As silent as he could, Fenris slipped into the water and began to swim as the dragons, their task discharged, took to the skies. The dragons had flown as close as they dared. Even those in the little town, deep in the slumber, would be roused by several dragons landing right next to them. Most of the orcs were not armored and swam quickly, but those who had bits and pieces of plate mail or leather armor had a harder time of it. The orcs emerged, dripping and chilled. Fenris glanced at them. Their green faces loomed pale in what light there was, and he frowned. He scooped up a handful of dirt and began to smear it on his face.
Coat yourself with mud,
he instructed both Tagar and the other orcs as quietly as possible.
We will need to move quickly and quietly without being seen.
The rest of them complied. Fenris felt a quick stab of wistful memory as he watched the faces of his companions turn brown. Once his skin had been this color. Once all orcs had been a wholesome earth or tree bark brown. Had things been so bad then? Had what they gained since that time been worth losing their world for? Sometimes he wondered. He shook off the melancholy and focused his attention on his companions, nodding as he saw they were all just brown blurs in darkness.
We need only a few boats. We'll take those 3 there, closest to the water's edge. Move quickly, and we'll kill anyone who gets in our way.
He glared at Tagar.
And only those in our way, Tagar. Keep your warriors in line. Silent kills only. We don't want anyone to sound the alarm. Let them! Tagar burst. We will strew the water with their bones.
No! Fenris's sharp hiss cut off.
Remember what Gorfin said. We get in, we get out. That's it.
Tagar grumbled, but Fenris glared at him until the Bone Chewer chieftain nodded.
Good.
Fenris gripped his axe, a narrow-bladed affair with a short haft and wicked edges.
Let's go.
They crept forward, moving silently across the moist earth, weapons at the ready. The first orcs had just reached the wooden pier when a dwarf walked past, clearly on patrol. He had not seen them yet, but he would any second, and Fenris nodded to the 2 warriors in front. One of them darted forward, grabbing the dwarf's head and yanking his axe across the dwarf's exposed neck, severing his head completely. The body dropped with only a soft thud, and the head rolled a short distance away, its expression revealing just the beginning of surprise. They advanced upon the boats. Fenris had selected. Another guard approached, this one human, and one of Tagar's warriors dropped him with a single crushing blow to the head. Fenris nodded his approval. He'd been worried about the Bone Chewer orcs, but perhaps they were not as savage and undisciplined as he had always thought. He moved on, then heard a strange crunching sound, and a short, breathy wail. Fenris rolled about. The orc was still crouched over his recent victim, and he was making a crunching sound, but not the wailing. Then, even as Fenris realized what the Bone Chewer was doing, the wailing drew out and became words.
Ah!
The guard cried, shrieking in pain. My leg! He's eating my leg! A cry went up, and lights were lit in buildings. Humans and dwarves poured forth from seemingly nowhere, and Fenris realized they weren't going to be able to escape without a fight. He attacked fiercely, hoping to end it quickly. His orcs rallied around him, and soon cleared the immediate area of humans. But Fenris knew the docks would be overrun before long.
To the boats!
He shouted, raising his axe high. They clambered onto the 3 boats, one Bone Chewer dropping his victim's remains back on the pier, hacking free the anchor lines, and casting off. It was clumsy, but the orcs managed to get all 3 boats pushed away from the docks and out into the bay beyond. Even as they left the harbor behind, however, a beacon fire flared to light.
This is Bargain Bay.
Ragnar said,
and the fleet of Kulderas patrols it regularly. They will see the beacon and be here within minutes. Then we should be gone before they arrive,
Fenris replied grimly. He pulled a pair of oars from the long case set between the benches lining the boat and tossed them into the nearest warrior.
Row!
he shouted, grabbing more of the oars and distributing them out as well.
Row with all your might!
The other boats followed his lead, and soon they were skimming across the water, their powerful arms lending to the boat's speed. But it was not enough. Fenris realized as he saw other larger boats racing towards them.
Kulturas naval vessels,
Ragnarok confirmed, studying their outlines.
Admiral Proudmoore hates orcs. He will stop at nothing to destroy us.
Can we fight them?
Fenris asked, but he knew the answer even before the Death Knight shook his head.
They were trained for ship-to-ship battles, and they can outrun us as well. We do not stand a chance.
Fenris glanced up at the star-pocketed sky and nodded.
Perhaps we don't. But then again, perhaps we do. Keep rowing!
The boats moved quickly, but as Ragnarok had predicted, the pursuit was faster. The human boats drew closer until Fenris could make out the grim men clad in all green who stood ready at the taller ship's railings. Many of them had bows ready, while others had short swords and axes and spears in hand. He knew his warriors could defeat a large number of humans if they were on land, but here at sea, they were at serious disadvantage. Fortunately, they had not come alone. Just as the first human boat came close enough for Fenris to make out the men's faces, a dark shape dropped out of the sky between them. Massive wings flapped hard enough to drive the boat back and knock the men off their feet. Then the dragon's jaws opened wide, and fire shot forth, engulfing the ship's prow. The tar-coated wood caught at once, and soon the entire boat was alight. The sound of screaming and crackling fire lifted Fenris's heart. But the humans did not flee. Again, their boats closed in, and again the black dragons intercepted it and charred timber and crew alike. A third time, the humans tried their weapons, bouncing off the dragon's tough hides. And a third boat was reduced to ash and bone. After that, human ships fell back, letting the 3 orc captured boats pull away. A cheer rang out from the orcs.
They're giving up!
Tagar cried from the prow of the boat beside him.
No! They're no match for the dragons, and they know it, Fenris corrected. But I would not think they're giving up.
Any sign of smaller fires on the other ships? Controlled ones?
Asked Ragnarok. Fenris studied the retreating vessels.
Yes, we see signal fire and smoke,
he said finally.
They're warning the rest of the fleet,
Ragnarok said.
They'll be waiting for us.
Tagar laughed from the prow of the boat beside them.
The warning will come too late,
he proclaimed, licking blood from his axe blade.
By the time the humans have gathered their courage to come after us, we will be long gone with our prize.
Fenris nodded. For the first time, he hoped that the bone chewer was right, and that he was wrong.